A man found dead under the most mysterious of circumstances, trapped inside the leg of a giant papier-mâché dinosaur statue. The Spanish king who was set on fire by his own nurse, and the multiple people who have died laughing at the same stupid joke. We'll reveal the strangest and some pretty funny demises on today's episode of the Infographics Show, Trapped Inside a Dinosaur and the World's Most Bizarre Deaths. Number 9. Let's begin our fatal journey in ancient Greece with a man whose name still echoes through modern law. Draco, an Athenian lawmaker, was so notoriously harsh on crime that his legacy still lives on in the word draconian, a term still used today to describe laws that are considered harsh and unfair. But despite his modern reputation, Draco was actually seen as a beloved statesman in his day, so much so that legends report him having a particularly bizarre death as a result. When he entered the theater in Aegina, Greece, the public wanted to show their appreciation by showering him with gifts of cloaks and hats. So many were tossed his way that poor Draco was smothered to death underneath them all. From one tyrannical fellow meeting an ironic death to another, we're headed over to ancient China to see how Duke Jing of Jin fell into the big sleep. Like a lot of weird rich people even today, Duke Jing was really afraid of death. The one thing that all the money and power in the world can't stave off when your number is up. That's why he asked a local shaman for advice. This shaman bravely gave Duke Jing the news that he wouldn't live to see the new wheat harvest, and the Duke took this personally. When the new harvest came around, Jing was still alive and kicking. So to just show how wrong that crummy shaman was, the Duke decided to eat some of that sweet, sweet wheat. He chowed down on some porridge, and apparently not having received the "don't shoot the messenger" memo, he killed the shaman out of spite. It was when it was time for a little bathroom break that things went wrong. The Duke tripped, accidentally fell into an open hole in the toilet. Remember, plumbing really wasn't what it is now back in those days, and then drowned in the muck. We personally choose to believe that the shaman did that from beyond the grave. Now it's time to take a look at our first of several deaths on this list caused by excessive laughter. No list of history's most bizarre deaths would be complete without the supposed death of the famous Greek playwright Aeschylus. According to ancient sources like Valerius Maximus and Pliny the Elder, who, let's be honest, never let facts get in the way of a good story, according to Pliny, Aeschylus had been given a prophecy that he would die because of a falling object, so he spent as much time outside as possible. The problem for this playwright was that he also was rocking a chrome dome, and an eagle far above mistook his head for a rock. The eagle was carrying a tasty turtle, and he needed somewhere that could smash open the shell to enjoy its delicious turtle meat. So the eagle dropped it, sending the unfortunate animal down like a missile onto the top of Aeschylus's bald head, cashing in his chips like Chicken Little. That's somehow still not as embarrassing as the way that Stoic philosopher Chrysippus of Soli joined the choir invisible by laughing so hard at his own joke that he died. According to philosopher Diogenes, Chrysippus saw a donkey eating figs and told one of his slaves that they should fetch some neat wine so the donkey could wash them down. Yeah, that was the joke this guy died laughing at. Talk about easily amused. This drags us out of antiquity and into the measly Middle Ages, where plenty of folks were coming to a sticky end, and some of those sticky ends were naturally really weird. Number 8. Life was going great for Sigurd the Mighty, Earl of Orkney, until it very suddenly wasn't. He had just managed to slay one of his most bitter enemies, the Pictish warrior Mael Brigda the Buck-Toothed. We know it's a much stupider nickname than the Mighty, but it does get relevant soon. After defeating Brigda, Sigurd hung his head from the saddle of his horse as a trophy to ride back to his home. But during the bumpy ride, Brigda's famous buck teeth grazed Sigurd's leg. Given that being bitten by a corpse is not exactly sanitary, Sigurd later died of an infection slayed by a foe that he had already killed. So we guess the bucktooth is mightier than the mighty. Let's move on. Speaking of guys with plenty of awesome names who ended up counting worms in decidedly tame ways, meet King Edmund Ironside of England. It wasn't an attack on Edmund's iron side that killed him, it was truly an unpleasant sneak attack on his backside. According to 12th century English historian Henry of Huntingdon, an assassin who didn't like the way things were being run managed to infiltrate and hide under the king's toilet. It's an act so gross that you really have to respect the assassin's dedication to his task. When King Edmund popped a squat, the assassin shoved his sword up through the toilet and stabbed the king twice in the… well, you get the idea. The king croaked in about as messy, painful, and embarrassing a way as you could possibly imagine. But now it's time for another first on this list, a case of horrifying mass death. And we swear it's weirder and funnier than it sounds, because we're talking about the Erfurt latrine disaster. It's another case of bathrooms behaving badly and taking people's lives in the process. A major political meeting was underway on the second floor of the Erfurt Cathedral, packed with nobles and high-ranking officials. Unfortunately, the centuries-old wooden floor beneath them wasn't built to support such a heavy crowd. It gave way without warning, sending everyone into the open latrine below. Around 60 to 100 people allegedly died during the event, some from drowning in raw human excrement. But luckily for all involved, Henry VI, the King of Germany, was able to escape unharmed despite witnessing the calamitous event. Charles II of Navarre, the king so detested that his nickname among his constituents was Charles the Bad. As he got older, he became so sickly, his physician ordered him to be wrapped in tightly bound linen and soaked in distilled spirits. We have no idea whether that would actually work as a cure for anything. It is very possible that the physician just hated him too. After sewing the linen shut, a maid noticed a loose thread on the bindings, so rather than getting a pair of scissors, she decided to burn it off, immediately causing the king, soaked in high-proof alcohol, to go up in flames. Rounding out the weird deaths of the Middle Ages, there is the way that King Martin of Aragon fell off his perch. In 1410, he decided to go truly over the top at a feast, and he ate an entire goose. We're not even mad, that is just impressive. However, he then retired to his bedroom with an intense case of digestion. The royal tummy ache needed the ultimate medicine, laughter, provided by King Martin's favorite jester, Bora. When Bora arrived in the king's quarters, he asked the jester where he'd been, to which Bora replied, "Out of the next vineyard where I saw a young deer hanging by his tail from a tree," as if someone had so punished him for stealing figs. The king found this so funny, he laughed for 3 hours, eventually falling out of his bed. By the time he hit the floor, he was dead. What is it with animals eating figs making people die laughing? It's really not that funny, guys. This brings us to another grab bag of utterly bizarre deaths from the Renaissance and early modern period, a time when humanity was supposed to be inching closer to enlightenment and modernity. And yet, somehow, the deaths only get weirder. Number 7. In 1518, the dancing plague rocked the city of Strasbourg, where, due to widely speculated but still unknown causes, dozens of people suddenly took to the streets and started boogieing like there was no tomorrow. The problem was, for some of those people, there really was no tomorrow. Those afflicted by the hysteria would sometimes dance in the streets for days on end without stopping to eat, drink, or use the restroom. As a result, some of the clinically hysterical dancers died of heart attacks or sheer exhaustion while making it work on the dance floor. While the exact number of dead is a hotly debated fact, it is still one of the weirdest historical incidents of all time. Next up is Hans Steininger, who didn't die from dance but instead became one of history's weirdest fashion victims. Hans, the mayor of Braunau am Inn, a town in modern-day Austria, had a unique quality, specifically a 4.5-foot-long beard. It was so long and majestic that normally he kept most of it in a leather pouch as he walked along, to avoid it trailing on the floor and collecting dirt. But on the one day when he decided to make an exception, it cost him his life. In 1567, a fire broke out in the town. Hans, committed to his role of mayor, rushed to help. In his haste to do his civic duties, he tripped over his own beard and broke his neck in the process. Was it really worth it for the cool face for Hans? Sometimes deciding to be weird like that can get you killed. Other times, having an obsession with sticking to social etiquette is what dooms you. Number 6. Tycho Brahe, the legendary Danish astronomer, met his end in 1601, not in a blaze of cosmic glory, but from being a little too polite. At a multi-hour banquet in Prague, Brahe decided he needed to take a leak, but he didn't indulge in this basic biological urge because he worried that breach of etiquette would make him seem rude. When he returned home, his bladder was in immense pain and he had trouble urinating. He would die a painful death 11 days later, with the most likely cause being uremia. This is a kind of blood poisoning that results from the body not being able to filter out the toxin urea, which is done by, you guessed it, going to the bathroom. It's better to be impolite than dead, folks. Sir Francis Bacon, the legendary thinker and statesman under King James I, died as a result of an experiment. No, not something with deadly chemicals or radioactive isotopes or volatile explosives. It was actually something much stupider. He was stuffing a dead chicken full of snow just to see if it would better preserve the meat, and caught a fatal case of pneumonia in the process. Just goes to show, nobody likes cold bacon. And somehow, that is still a dignified death compared to what happened to Sir Arthur Aston. Sir Arthur was a cavalier supporting King Charles I in the English Civil War between the Royalists and the Republicans. He also had a wooden leg. When Sir Arthur was captured by George Cromwell's Roundhead rebels during the siege of Drogheda, the enemy soldiers suspected that he was hiding gold inside of his prosthetic. They shortly after found out that he wasn't, by beating Sir Arthur to death with his own wooden leg. The English Civil War shook out in favor of Cromwell, and King Charles I was executed. However, in 1660 the monarchy restoration took place, and King Charles II ascended to the throne. Why are we mentioning this? Because legend has it that Scottish aristocrat and Renaissance man Thomas Erfurt died laughing when he heard about Charles's ascendancy. Maybe he was eating some figs at the time. For the last oddball death before we truly enter the modern period, we're back in the good old US of A to hear about how the judge and retired military colonel Samuel Spencer got smoked in 1793. He managed to survive literal warfare, but got done in by an angry turkey. One day he was out sitting in a chair on his porch and dozing off while wearing a red cap. A passing turkey saw the red bobbing up and down, and for some reason he took that personally. It launched a vicious clawing and pecking attack that knocked the judge from his chair in shock. The resulting injuries caused an infection leading to his demise days later. Even with everything that came before, we can tell you that the 1800s were honestly an exceptionally weird century for deaths. Number 5. Things got off to a bad start in 1814 when a catastrophe at a large brewery in London resulted in the London beer flood, which swept away and killed 8 people, and a few more died after that as a result of alcohol poisoning from the booze vapors. This wouldn't be topped for over 100 years when the 1919 Great Molasses Flood in Boston, Massachusetts, killed 21 people and injured scores more. It was also a really terrible century to be a president, especially as far as weird deaths were concerned. President William Henry Harrison set the trend by catching either pneumonia or entropic fever by giving a 2-hour inauguration speech in the rain. He died a month into his presidency, taking the dubious record of both shortest time in office and the first president to die in office. But that is still more dignified than the end of President Zachary Taylor, who pooped himself to death after eating raw cherries and iced milk at a 4th of July event at the site of the Washington Monument. And in 1854, a 13-year-old named William Snyder died after being swung around by his ankles by a clown named Manuel Reyes. Yet another reason to be justifiably suspicious of those grease-painted nightmares. But even the bad luck of that is nothing compared to what happened to an unidentified Iraqi male in 1888. During a once-in-a-lifetime meteor shower that also happened to be the end of a lifetime for this poor fellow, he was hit by one of those fast-moving space rocks and put out to pasture for good. To this day, this man's death is considered one of the only credible cases of death by meteorite ever recorded. There are still plenty of weird deaths in the 1800s, but frankly, they pale in comparison to the deaths that have taken place in the true modern era, the 20th and 21st century. This is when things got big and freaky like they never had before. And when we say freaky, for some of these we truly do mean freaky. Number 4. In 1902, R. Stanton Walker met his maker as a result of a truly improbable accident. He was passing a knife to his friend while watching an amateur baseball game in Ohio when a foul ball flew into the stands and hit his hand. The impact caused the blade to be driven straight into his chest. When asked by a friend if he was okay, Walker said it didn't hurt much, and then he bled to death a few minutes later. 6 years later, in 1908, German General Dietrich von Holstenhausler was going out in style. As a member of the German Imperial Military Cabinet, he was part of Kaiser Wilhelm II's inner circle, and during a castle getaway he decided to treat them all to a high-energy ballet performance while dressed completely in drag. However, the intensity of the performance was too much for the 56-year-old military man, who dropped dead as soon as it was over. The whole thing was swept under the rug at the time because the Kaiser was worried about rumors of homosexuality being rife in the German military. 4 years after that, another humiliating death would come for Franz Reichelt, a man who was also known as the Flying Tailor. Sadly, as you're about to find out, the Falling Tailor probably would have been a more fitting handle for him. In 1910, he designed a pair of cloth wings that he hoped would work as a kind of Batman-esque gliding system, and he would jump off the Eiffel Tower. Franz Reichelt's dreams and ambitions, much like his body, met the ground with an incredible force. The 1900s proved that sometimes even the things we do to stay healthy might end up being the death of us. Eben Byers, a socialite, industrialist, and avid golfer, proved this in the most horrifying way imaginable, thanks to his favorite health drink, Radithor Irradiated Spring Water. Radiation was a weird health craze in the early 1930s, given the US hadn't used it to wipe 2 Japanese cities off the map yet. So Eben kept on chugging that radioactive water, even if it was slowly melting him from the inside. And we wish we were speaking metaphorically there. Eventually, Evan's jaw had become so degraded from radiation poisoning that it entirely fell off of his face. It was a condition he didn't need to deal with for too long, because he then died of radiation-induced cancer. That's a pretty good reason why it's best to be a little skeptical when some dumb new health trend seems to take the world by storm overnight. Number 3. Things didn't get any more normal in the latter half of the 1900s either. Luciano Recchiaconi, an Italian soccer player nicknamed the Blonde Angel because of his golden locks, was also a fan of practical jokes. But one of those pranks went just a little too far when he decided to pretend to rob a jewelry store with some friends in 1977. Unsurprisingly, he got shot for his trouble. Later that same decade, in 1979, Robert Williams also became an unfortunate trailblazer. The Ford worker was struck in the head and killed by one of the robotic arms manufacturing cars in the factory, making him the first person to ever be murdered by a robot. Well done, Rob! In the gritty, neon-soaked haze of the 1980s, nightclub bouncer Jimmy Ferrozzo, which, let's just be honest, sounds exactly like the name of a sleazy nightclub bouncer, met his end in a way that was equal parts wild and tragic. While getting amorous with his lady friend atop a grand piano at the club where he worked, things got a little too heated. The piano was rigged to descend from the ceiling onto the dance floor, and while the two of them were making the beast with two backs, Jimmy accidentally activated the piano. It ascended up to the ceiling and sadly crushed them both to death. And in the 1990s, perhaps the weirdest and most utterly unnecessary death was that of 38-year-old Gary Hoy. Gary was a successful lawyer who worked at the Toronto Dominion Center, specifically on the 24th floor. For some reason, one of his favorite things to do was to prove to his new employees that the windows were unbreakable by throwing his body against them. Why some junior lawyers would even care how tough the windows were at their firm is really anyone's guess. After one too many window body slams, the glass didn't break, but the entire sheet did come loose from the window frame. Poor old Gary was sent tumbling 24 stories to oblivion on a glass surfboard. And again, we really just can't figure out why anyone would do this. As the 90s came to a close and the new millennium began, the bizarre deaths did not slow down, they ramped up. Number 2. In 2007, Jennifer Strange met a tragically ironic end, one that sadly lived up to her last name. She participated in an extremely ill-conceived radio contest in Sacramento, California, called Hold Your Wii for a Wii. Contestants had to drink excessive amounts of water and hold it in for as long as possible to win a brand new Nintendo Wii. But to make things more difficult, they also forced contestants to drink excessive amounts of water, which started to make the 28-year-old mother seriously sick. By the end of the contest, she vomited and would later die of water intoxication. 3 children were left without a mother because of a radio contest. In the aftermath, the station KD&D were sued and they had to make a $16.5 million payout to Jennifer Strange's family. They say dogs are man's best friend, but not in this case. For James Campbell, a 68-year-old retiree in Florida, it was just another day, or so he thought. Heading out for the day, James got out of his Chevy to open the gate at the end of his driveway. It was at this moment that his dog, who was still inside of the vehicle, sealed his fate. The dog jumped onto the front seat and put a paw on the gas pedal, causing the van to roll forward and run over James Campbell. Nobody can hurt you like the ones you love. In case you were wondering, these baffling deaths didn't slow down one bit into the 2020s. Number 1. During the COVID-19 outbreak, 38-year-old police lieutenant Christian Bullock logged out of life in an extremely bizarre fashion while trying to break up a cockfight in the Philippines. Normally, the sport is legal there, but it had been temporarily banned as a social distancing measure to prevent the spread of the virus. However, while he was trying to fight through the chaos, Lieutenant Bullock was attacked by one of the raging roosters, which had a bladed spur attached to his leg, to make the violence of the fights more spectacular. The bladed spur sliced into Bullock's thigh, severing his femoral artery, one of the body's most important blood vessels. Sadly, he bled to death right there in the course of duty. That's some pretty awful luck from Lieutenant Bullock, but we don't think anyone has ever had worse luck than what we're about to discuss right now. An unidentified man from Brazil in 2021 who seemed well and truly screwed no matter what he did. First, he and 2 friends went out fishing on a lake in Brasilândia de Minas the day before Halloween, when the trio were attacked by an angry swarm of bees. In order to escape the bee onslaught, they jumped into the water, where 2 survived but the third was eaten by piranhas. You really just can't make this up, huh? But that might not even be the most insane animal incident that occurred, so far anyway, in the 2020s. That dubious honor would have to go to Maya Murmu from India in June 2022, whose death proves that the phrase "an elephant never forgets" includes murderous grudges. In what was already an incredibly tragic case, Maya was trampled to death by an elephant. Heartbreaking? Yes, but in regions where humans and elephants live in close quarters, such encounters sadly are not unheard of. Fatal run-ins happen from time to time, but what makes this case utterly bizarre is what happened afterwards. At Maya's funeral, the service was interrupted by a rampaging elephant, believed by many to be the same elephant that killed her, inexplicably back for round 2. The elephant used its trunk to grab Maya's corpse from the funeral pyre, stamp on it, and then toss it aside, adding a little disrespect for the dead on top of its crime of murder in the first degree. And of course, the answer to the question that you've all been so patiently waiting for. What was that about a dead guy in a dinosaur statue? Santa Coloma de Gramenet in Barcelona, Spain is where we lay our scene. One of the more curious local landmarks in the area was a huge model of a stegosaurus that was made to promote the opening of a now-defunct movie theater. A 39-year-old man, for reasons still unknown, decided to climb into the dreadful dino, and he managed to get stuck inside the hollow space of one of the creature's legs. Sadly, he passed away while inside and remained there until his body was discovered by a father and son who just so happened to be walking by, at which point he traded a dinosaur leg for a wooden overcoat. But weird demises cut both ways. Sometimes you die in the body of an animal, other times you die because you put an animal body in you. This was the truly bizarre, and on Valentine's Day of 2025, shockingly recent, death of a 14-year-old boy from Brazil named Davi Nunes Moreira. As part of what was suspected to be an online challenge, Davi made the baffling choice to mash up the remains of a dead butterfly, mix it with water, and inject it into his leg. He grew sick shortly after and died of septic shock at the hospital. And if that is not a truly once-in-all-of-history way to meet the Reaper, we don't know what is. Now check out dumbest, strangest, and most painful ways people have died. Or watch this instead.